All right, everyone, welcome back to Exponential Awareness. I had a bit of an issue with yesterday's episode, a number of issues, and so I just went ahead and deleted that. And no harm, no foul. I'm sure we'll cover that information in many videos to come as things continue to repeat and continue to resurge as points worth talking about. So I found this very interesting. It talks about GDP between the EU and the US widening, in that the EU's GDP is decreasing while the US is increasing. And this brings up an important fact about the relationship between per capita GDP and mean per capita total power consumption in watts. Essentially, there is a very tight correlation, positive correlation between the amount of power you have available and consume and your GDP output per capita. And not only that, the cost of electricity, the cost of power, specifically in relation to fossil fuels. So here's a graph that shows various countries and where they place. And you can see there's a trend line here. And some outperform. They produce more GDP than power consumed. So they have a more rectangular shape. But if we were to take this, right, we zoom in, and this is going to be a little bit messy. I'm not going to take all the time to plot it out extremely well. But if we just drew, let me go ahead and erase that. If we just drew a trend line right there, and right there. So our upper control limit and our lower control limit, right? Let's make these a little bit smaller. If we just drew an upper control limit line and a lower control limit line there and there, you would see we would capture most of the data points. This is the average right in the middle, or perhaps the median. I don't know how they calculated this, but right in the middle of the trend line, right? You have some that perform a little bit better on their GDP usage. As you can see, it's longer on this leg, more rectangular, which means per capita GDP is higher compared to per capita electricity consumption. So if we have this as a fact, a repeatable fact and a repeatable trend, if electricity becomes more expensive, you would expect per capita GDP to decrease. So say Europe is receiving a bunch of fossil fuel from Russia, and then that ability to import, or the price of import, significantly increases, you would expect GDP to go down. It's more expensive to conduct business. People's discretionary budgets for household discretionary spending tightens because because energy prices have gone up. They have to spend more of their income on basic needs like heating the home or cooling the home or cooking, right? And so we see less currency units chase after non-needs, less discretionary spending. And so that hurts GDP output. Now, there's some countries that outperform in GDP compared to electricity consumption, and that could be for a number of reasons. That could be because a nation has higher efficiency. That could be because a nation conducts more service industry related things that are low intensity on electricity consumption, such as the US and Canada and many Western countries. And then you could have countries that are more manufacturing intensive, and so their per GDP is a bit lower and they consume more power, right? And a pretty even position, almost squared off in many cases. A little bit more rectangular here, pretty square for Aruba here in Taiwan, which I didn't know Aruba would score this anywhere near Taiwan as far as their relationship to per GDP, per capita GDP, and per capita electricity consumption. That's very interesting to note. Two very, very, very different societies there between Aruba and Taiwan. And so that's an inescapable fact of life, of the world. And there's several graphs that will show this and demonstrate this. So why is this important? Well, if you want to make Europe great again, if you want to make the US great again, if you want to make any country great again, you need cheap electricity, cheap fuel. And we see the opposite of that happening in the world of fossil fuels, specifically regarding oil, which has been the main driver at cheap energy over the last several decades. And so it's getting more and more expensive to find new oil, and it's getting more and more expensive to pull that oil out of the ground. And here's another important thing to consider. Go ahead and open a Word doc here. So this is going to be very ugly, and eventually I want to get something tied in here so I can just draw on a screen and erase it. It'd be a lot easier. So let's say you pull oil out of the ground. Actually, let's make that a can I do a cylinder? Don't think I have a cylinder shape. Oh, there we go. So let's say we pull a barrel of oil out of the ground. And let's say we take that oil and we use it for, let's say, to pull more oil out of the ground, or we use that, to do something else. Those are the options. We can do something else. We can either use that oil to find more oil, or we can use that oil to, let's say, find other stuff and things, right? So we can use some of that oil to do other activities other than finding oil. And when we do that, we are then making the cost of finding more oil more expensive, because less of that original energy is going back into finding new energy. So what happens if instead of just, let's say instead of just spending it on one other thing that we do with that oil, we spend it on several other things that we do with that oil, like making eyelash extensions and fake fingernails and a million different types of vehicles, and that they change every 3 to 4 years. The model changes, and nothing's standardized, and we have to keep creating. Okay, well, let's say, I don't know how this is going to work. I haven't done this before. Let's say instead of just that many things, we have, ooh, my computer didn't like that. Let's reverse that. Ooh, my computer really doesn't like copying that many things at once. Note to self, Microsoft Word. It's not friendly in that regard. Okay, so let's say instead of just doing that many things, we do that many things with the oil instead of reinvesting it in new energy. Right? You see where this is going? The more other things you do with your oil, the more exponentially expensive your oil gets. You're doing more and more other things other than finding new oil with your oil. And on and on and on and on throughout capitalism, right? We take a bunch of this oil. Let's say historically, we took, exploring with the shapes here a bit. let's say historically, we used 90% of our oil to find new oil. So we're reinvesting. That's a compounding reinvestment, right? And then as we take more of our energy and do other things with it, we're doing less and less. So we're doing less reinvesting with our energy. More of it's being diverted to doing other stuff and things. So there's less oil available to go find new oil because that energy is being pulled somewhere else. This is supply and demand. You cannot escape the laws of supply and demand. So what would happen if all of a sudden all of these things here disappeared? And we went back to just a base foundation of things that we need, right? So house energy, food, basic transportation, standardized transportation. Instead of so many custom homes, we had many homes that were designed very similarly. Well, you'd get really efficient in doing those things. All of this is really inefficient. The more differentiation you have in a system, the less efficient it is. Let's say you never made two of anything. Everything you made was unique every single time. Where you put the bolts on this car, the position, the wheelbase, the engine type, the steering wheel, the interior, the length, the width, the height, the paint job, everything, that would be incredibly expensive. And so if that's true, the opposite must be true. That if you standardize everything, or very closely, very few options, limited options, all of a sudden you have a ton of efficiency. Well, then you can take a lot of that energy again and reinvest it back into finding more energy. So this is exponentially eating away at your efficiency. And the opposite of this, standardization, helps your efficiency exponentially. This is the most difficult concept for humans to wrap their mind around, is exponential impacts. And that includes highly educated professionals that are supposed to, I guess, know this stuff. That when you add in more differentiation, you're adding more chaos, and chaos is expensive and inefficient. When you standardize things, you remove chaos and you add efficiency. You see, instead of these all being the same exact shape, what if they were all just slightly different, just in a little way, right? Just a little bit different. Different colors, different sizes, different shapes, right? This all takes different tooling, different designs. There's more chance for errors, and on and on and on. The more you differentiate, the more expensive. I mean, look at just taking the time to make these different and stretching them out is taking me a lot of time just to do that, instead of copying and pasting, right? It takes up time. It's inescapable. The more you differentiate, the more time it takes, the more chances there are for errors, the less efficient. So if countries want to get very efficient, they need to standardize things. They need to decrease differentiation. They need to reinvest more of the oil they extract from the ground or they purchase back into more energy and more efficient processes. But in a world where everybody wants to be unique, right? Your consumer's asking for unique experiences, unique stuff. I don't want standardization. I want my avocado toast with this on it. I want my avocado toast with that on it. It's differentiated. It's like, how many of you have sat down at a restaurant with a 5-page menu and you sit there thinking all day long or for hours about what you want to eat, and then you make a choice and you're like, man, I really should have got this instead, versus you go to a drive-in burger place and they have 5 options on the menu and you pick something and you're having a blast and having a great time. It's the paradox of choice, right? We think we want all this, but really we want this. It's true. And it proves it out again and again in psychology. And so people would actually be much more happier with this. But in a market where people, the marketing gurus of our time, think that the way to win the market over is to create everything in a unique experience rather than creating a better experience. They think uniqueness equals better, but that's not true. And so our world has moved towards doing all of this instead of this because the presupposition is that uniqueness equals better rather than a better overall total experience is better. And thus, we've invested less money in finding new energy, which is making energy more expensive because it's more scarce than when we were investing a lot of money and resources into finding energy. Right? So all of a sudden, our barrels are shrinking. We have less and less energy. And then if you think about that as the reinvestment, it's compounding. You have less energy that you're now trying to split up between still doing all of this stuff and finding new energy. Right? Again and again and again, so the equation goes. Anyways, that's all I have for this one. I'm planning on doing more of these kind of educational videos about inputs and outputs and how things work in the world because I think it's highly valuable. I will still be covering all the new stuff, but I want to use the news to teach a little bit more than just reading the news article. Till next time, stay exponentially aware.